and I suppose being a developer as well, where we've had ongoing maintenance issues with areas. Now, all of our projects must go through a CIDD review. All of our consultants are required to meet our CIDD reviews. And that basically means a full audit of the project against those alerts. And then we will go back through those alerts and make sure that we're following the strict requirements of those. So I've just got a little image there of an example of one of our CIDD alerts. So basically this one is protect aluminium with insulating coatings when placed in mortar or cementitious screed. So these things can range from items like this to balustrade heights to waterproofing, and it's just things that in typical construction you come unstuck on a lot of projects, and we have a specific set of rules of how we avoid basically getting into those issues down the track. All of our site teams and design teams are required to sit through CIDD training, which basically runs through each of those items and typical areas where we come unstuck. It's usually waterproofing is the big one and a huge focus for Lendlease, roofing and the details of how you close out roofing, penetrations, things like that. Masonry and brick construction as well is one that we focus on. And then there's the safety and design workshop and register. So this is specific to the project. We have obviously a standard template that we run, but this then feeds into that specific process. So all of our consultants and our D&C subcontractors are required to maintain this register. I obviously lead the management of that register, ensure that everyone is adding to that register, and then we hold workshops to go through those, and we then involve the client and end users in those workshops, and I'll go into a bit more detail on that. Third-party design audits. So one thing that we have started to do more regularly now is engage third-party consultants to do audits on specific disciplines. So on this project here, given that we were doing some major structural works to the building, cutting out an atrium in a 1970s building, we had a third-party structural engineer engaged to do a complete review of the design engineer's work. So depending on the complexities of the project, we'll engage specific third-party audits for those. And then the final thing is our integrated solutions team. So we are lucky enough to have an external design team. Well, I suppose internal design team, but external to the project. And they cover your key areas, so structure, and then all your services trades, so mech-elec, hydraulics and fire, and a specific DDA and BCA compliance reviewer as well. So all of those specific team members will conduct a review of the project, review of all the drawings. They'll create a register of issues that they find, and then those issues need to be closed out by the consultant team. So it's helpful for someone in my position. I'm not expected to be an expert in all fields. I've got a team of people behind me that support me and review their specific trades and understand the detail around where we need to get to. So that's sort of been a very helpful sort of learning curve, I suppose, for myself, because you can pick up a lot of things that I would never pick up on or have the understanding of. So safety and design, I suppose, going through all of that's obviously what we call our overarching safety and design process, and then there is the specific safety and design register and workshops that we hold. So on this project, we did things a little bit differently, and I think probably was sort of influenced by myself coming from client side and running this on a few different projects. But basically we engaged an external safety and design consultant. They were called OH&S Solutions out of Sydney. And they were engaged to conduct a review of the drawings, a review of the existing register that had been handed over from Curtin when we took over the project, and run a workshop and facilitate a workshop with that information, and then populate an additional safety and design register. I suppose people say that, I mean, that is essentially my role, but why did we engage an external consultant? in my history of working in safety and design, and I think it's a shame, a lot of consultants just see it as a box ticking exercise. It's something they're engaged to do. It's something they're required by code to do. But it becomes one of those laborious tasks where you probably flick it to the grad in the office and they're filling out, working at heights, making sure services aren't near open spaces, confined spaces, things like that. It becomes very generic and very repetitive from previous projects. And I find that's where things slip through the gaps, where there's not that specific detail on that project, because it just becomes something that people regurgitate. So I think engaging an external consultant, and I know Mark would agree with me, in that process, when you're sitting with the client, sitting with the consultants and the contractors, they really draw out information and they ask the right questions. So I think that was, I've so often sat in safety and design workshops where everyone sort of looks down and avoids eye contact and hopes that no one will ask them any questions. And these facilitators really drew out those questions from people, which I found incredibly helpful, and also I think gives people a different perspective looking at the building. An architect can obviously design to a certain point, but they don't often maintain or have anything to do with those buildings post completion. And one thing I think that probably a lot of clients could really work on is that feedback post completion to architects, because they go through and do a design and think that they're doing all the right things, but the maintenance team may come in 3 years later and it's an awful building to try and maintain, or there's some sort of detail that doesn't work. And I think that sort of feedback would really be helpful. But these facilitators helped draw that sort of information out, and I think get the client's O&M team really talking about those specific items. So this is just an example of our safety and design register for the project. So I'm sure you've all seen these types of registers, basically identifying the consequence and the risk, and the sort of how that then can be managed out of the design and what the residual risk rating of that is. So we have one of these on our project, and that's continually tracked, and this was developed on the back of that workshop with everyone. And then I suppose one of the other things that I've come across within safety and design is all of this work is done up front with the design team, and that's all well and good, but how does that actually get implemented in the design and on site? I think that's one of the big sort of disconnects in the industry, is that the design team do all of this work and the construction team will do all of this work, but it's actually implementing them together. So one of the things that Lendlease carries out is the PROA, which I've talked about, but also that then feeding into the project delivery plan. So as I noted before, our PROA is fed in from all of the key members of site, key members of the team, sorry, and that then manages key risks throughout the project. So what we will do is we'll go through and identify high risk activities within the construction based on the design and based on the safety and design risks, and then set up an engineer to manage a specific project delivery plan. So I'll go through a couple of examples of where we've gone through this on our project here, and hopefully that sort of explains to you the detail that we go into. So one of the big key risks on the project was the stair 5 demolition and reconstruction. So in the northwest corner of the building, we are demolishing a section of slab throughout the building and constructing a new fire stair. This is basically to meet the occupancy levels of the new occupancy levels of the building. So we had to construct a new fire stair. So obviously a key area for the building, we're demolishing, really old slabs. So that's a high risk activity. We're in a live campus environment, and we've got, sort of rock breakers and excavators and cranes and all sorts of things operating while we're operating in a live environment. So this is just an example of sort of the breakdown and the level of detail that we go into for these key high-risk activities, and the sort of work that needs to be undertaken to ensure that it's carried out in a safe manner. So I think following the process through, it's identified in the PROA as a key risk item. It's carried through safety and design as obviously how do we design this to be built in the safest way possible. I suppose with a fire stair, there's not a whole lot of ongoing operational maintenance, so it doesn't feed in so much to that side, but it's really how can we build it in the safest way possible. And then this project delivery plan then carries that through of how we actually carry those works out on site. So an example of this, I suppose, is the methodology behind how we carry this out and the additional structural interfaces that we need to carry out into the building to then demolish the works. So we've had additional steel bracing put in and propping put in, and then also carbon fibre strips put into this building before we even think about cutting away the slabs. So it's all of that work involving the structural engineer through that design phase, carrying that methodology out on site, making it safe before we then start cutting out the slab on site. And for instance, we haven't actually even started cutting out this slab yet on site because we're still waiting for that design methodology, the top-down sort of propping, structural supports going in, and then as you remove those props, cutting out the slab. So just a sort of I just wanted to show you, I suppose, the detail that we go into in these areas. So this is the methodology of where we how we carry out the works, and I suppose it's got reference to our GMRs, so our global mandatory requirements, and how each of those key items feed into the demolition of this staircase. One of the other major pieces of work on the project is the Atrium Cut Out. So this one was a very exciting and I suppose nervous opportunity for the team, because we're cutting out a 1970s concrete slab, retaining the central column. So having that column, instead of spanning floor to floor, it's now spanning a double height, and the additional structural strengthening required to the slab around the cutout and that column. So again, breakdown of the PDP below, sort of the steps taken to make that area safe in order for us to then carry out those works. A lot of this highlights hold points. So when do we need to get surveyors in? When do we need to monitor deflections? So that each of this can be handed to the site team so they know exactly, you know, who needs to come in and do the checks, and when those checks are ticked off and when it's then safe to carry out the next activity. So you see here, in step 2, there's a hold point. So we've got 3 structural engineers coming out to do pre-demo inspections, confirming that we're now comfortable to start cutting away that slab. So that's around strengthening the central column. And then hold point, get all of the engineers out, get the ticks and the approvals that we require, and then start the demolition. So there's a number of steps, and these PDPs break that down and highlight where those key risks are. Again, just a bit of an example. One of the items that we did do here was a lot of carbon fibre. So you can see these images here, these bands here are all carbon fibre bands, which is basically sort of adding external reinforcement to the slab in order to prevent any deflection around this area when we do start cutting out the floor slab. Hold points, again, to ensure inspections happen, that we do pull tests, things like that, to ensure that the carbon fibre is adhering to the slab as it should, and then making it safe to start the work. Again, another really interesting exercise, because we're driving excavators and rock breakers on a 50-year-old slab. So these PDPs pick up key structural requirements around that sort of work. So how do we ensure that there's enough back propping for the excavator to drive over the slab that we're breaking, and is it safer to break it and let it fall down, or break it and take it away from above. Facade demolition. So again, one of the key activities, we basically here broke out the existing concrete facade on the north and south of the building. And this one was actually one of our very high level activities that went right through our business, right up to the sort of tippy top of delivery in Lendlease. One of the reasons for that is that we were breaking out facade here on level 6 of the building, and how we then managed the fall of that material while people are carrying out works, again, also in a live campus environment. So this went right through a very detailed review, and Curtin as the client were also involved in those reviews about how we carry out those works safely. So it involved, I suppose, just this image here shows it quite well. We've got the back propping here because this is the large box beam above. We've then got the EWP, which the gentleman who is carrying out the rock breaking is on. This is tethered back so that even though we have wheel stops here, there's 2 points of restraint. And then ensuring that this netting was installed so that all of the material that's falling outwards is not going sort of further than it needs to go, basically, because you're dropping it 4 or 5 levels. So that was the business was quite nervous about the works carrying out, and so then it goes through this project delivery plan that is developed, goes through a number of reviews. So just some of the photos showing the works being undertaken, and we actually carried out these works at night time too, to avoid any sort of interface as much as possible with students, and I suppose noises. So here's one of my favourite PDP plans. We've got the little Lego construction men showing you what we're doing, but basically detailing how we undertook this work, and the key steps and hold points that needed to be carried out around there. That goes right into, you know, how are we managing fume extraction from the excavator, right through to where's the rubble going to fall and how is that then removed from the project. Services tower. So this is our new area of construction, which I sort of showed you those images earlier. So we've got a number of different slab formations in this area, and that was around keeping program, maintaining program. So we've got slab on ground on level 2. We've then got a Bondex slab on level 3 and hollow core slabs on 4, 5.5 and 7. So the reason that we did that was we could build the level 4 hollow core slab, ensure that that was then rated for a crash deck, and then work underneath it. So that expedited our program so that we could carry out works below and above. Hollow core, obviously, if I don't know how many people are familiar with hollow core, but it's also known as delta core. So it's I suppose got the big hollow tubes right through those planks. Those planks are prefabricated off site, lifted into site, and then a topping slab poured over the top. So they're a lot more lightweight than your traditional concrete slab, and they can. I think we brought in one whole level in a day, comes in on the back of a truck, lifted into place, and your slab's basically assembled in a day. So it saves a lot of time, and is a lot lighter. So this, I suppose, was our main sort of physical construction on site. Everything else is redevelopment and refurbishment of existing. So this was a key activity for us, and also drove our program. So this was the critical path on our program. So an important item to really break down those steps and ensure that we're tracking Get's program on those key steps. Again, just the photo there of it all going in. So you can see these here are our hollow core planks that are being lifted into place. So I think we assembled this whole floor slab in a day or 2 days. Just some photos of the planks gone in. And then this is our Bondex slab underneath. So this is where we're now able to work underneath because we've got that safe crash deck on top. And some more examples of sites. So this is our level 3 slab. So this is the Bondex slab here and the hollow core planks you can see above. Are there any questions? I probably spoke quite quickly there, but.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Abby. I have one question, and that's really around, from a client safety professional perspective, what is the value that we can provide into the safety and design process? What's the value that, from a client perspective, that you feel is the most valuable?
Yeah, I think 2 areas, and I sort of touched on these a little bit. Ensuring that your O&M team pay attention at the beginning. I think what I've found in many construction projects that I've worked on is people struggle to see a tangible completion when you're in that early design phase. And so your design team sort of parts from the client and they go on this pathway to design the project, and then all of a sudden, comes end of detailed design into IFC documentation. We're then trying to pull it back to work with how O&M are going to actually maintain that building.
Yeah. I
think one of the first initial concept meetings should be with the O&M team. How do you manage buildings on site, specifically, in a campus environment where you know how you manage buildings? It's not just a one-off.
Yeah.
I think probably issues that we've come across on both of the Curtin projects that Lendlease has worked on here is that Curtin don't love rope access, but in today's day and age, rope access is what most buildings are designed to meet. So that sort of design path has gone down this way: rope access, and then the O&M team get involved, and we don't love that. We don't really know a lot about it, and it's almost too late to change the design of the building. So you're forcing the O&M team to pick up a new strategy that they're not 100% comfortable with. And I think if those conversations happen really early on, then you can actually change the way that works. It is difficult, and I think unfortunately O&M people are so caught up in their day-to-day role that they don't have time to sort of feed into something that's going to be built 2-3 years down the track, which is it's a struggle, and I'm sure every project comes up against it, but I think there could be some real value in holding concept meetings with the O&M team.
I think that's a really valuable insight, that the different phases of design, as things progress, it becomes more and more solid in terms of how it's going to be in the final form. And it's really that early initial concept phase where you can have the most amount of influence over how things are going to end up without having massive changes like you've mentioned. And rope access is a great example, because once you've designed something so that it has to be done that way, it's very hard to back engineer it.
Yes. And you've got an architect putting their hand out going, it's a design change.
Yeah, exactly. What have you seen or used in the past 3D modelling in that concept phase that helps to engage the operations and maintenance teams? I think it's getting to that point now. It's probably and very different in Perth because we're always a little bit behind the rest of the world. But I think it is getting to that stage, even just the block modelling and physical models to help people visualise, how high is this building? What are the levels around site like? Even if I don't like rope access and I wanted to use an EWP, can I actually even access this building with an EWP? Yeah.
So I think definitely that can help, and very white card basic models will help, I suppose, sell the image to the O&M team that might not pick that up on a floor plan.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I picked up, probably more so on design and built environment project was feedback on previous projects from the O&M team and how they manage those things. So we work with John Wardles on the School of Design and Built Environment here, and they are a fantastic architect who do a lot of schools of design and university buildings around the country, and they implement a lot of their details that they've used on other projects in their new buildings, and they sort of refine those details. But there were a number of items that they implemented from School of Design in Melbourne, and I think Monash Teaching and Learning Building, and Curtin sort of were asking for information about how that has worked at that building, but there was no feedback around sort of, you know, yeah, look, it looks great, but it's really hard to clean, or, you know, we can't operate these doors.
That you mentioned earlier, like, you know, how is it actually in operation working for you? So the architects can get some information back. Yes, looks wonderful, but no, it's a real pain.
Exactly. And I think, as much as we don't like to admit it, architects, their next project is really a repetition and a refinement of their previous project. So if you hold, say, a lessons learnt a year after the building's opened with your O&M team, and you say, right, what do you love about the building and what do you hate about the building? And then feed that back to the architects and say, you know, the building's fantastic and we love it, but these pivot doors that you specified, they never work. You know, it's things like that I think could be really useful in developing the way that front end design team operate, because at the end of the day, once the defect liability period's up, they never really hear much about it.
Yeah.
Unless, you know, something goes horribly wrong. There's no feedback, and they don't then have any sort of lessons learned of what they can do on the next project.
Yeah. Fantastic. Has anyone else got questions? Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Just wondering how you go with the tensions between budget and safety and design. With any of these projects, the budget's always a big concern. And so some things get sort of pushed to the side. And I know in our experiences, things like the design of the HVAC system, and particular things like humidity control, get sort of pushed into that, oh, it's nice to have basket. Probably less of a problem in Perth, but obviously we get a fair bit of water in Queensland, and we try and keep most of it out of the buildings, but generally it's everywhere, and so that obviously causes massive mould issues for us as well. And when I look back on some of our buildings and projects I've been involved with, they're like, oh, well, you know, we can't afford this particular process. It'll be comfortable, the air conditioning will be fine, but then 5-10 years down the track, we start getting mould and those sorts of concerns, and even things like the choices of the furnishings in the building, whether they're mould resistant versus. And I guess, yeah, just what's your experience in terms of battling against that budget of something that's a long-term maintenance issue versus just getting the bright and shiny building up and across the line?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing battle on all projects. Is the difference between what we actually want to deliver and the budget that we have to deliver it. And I think probably the answer lies quite firmly between the builder and the client. So I think, as you say, you've got the experience of things that happen further down the track, to feed that back into the design, and probably comes back to my last point around that lessons learnt exercise of feeding that back into buildings so that we can allow money in the budgets up front for that. I think Lendlease, sort of as I touched on, that CIDD training and implementation, those sort of things are things that we will implement on a project no matter the budget, no matter if there is a loss to Lendlease. if the design doesn't cover that, that's something that we will implement, because we know that it's going to be an issue down the track. We've experienced that issue before, and we need to make that change or implement that in the design. I suppose I haven't come across any issues where the O&M team have sort of raised things that we haven't been able to implement within budget, but comes down to your design team picking up on those sort of bits and pieces and implementing them early on so that they can be added into the budget at that phase. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but just sharing the issue with you.
I think also how that is put out to the market in terms of what your initial specification is. If it's completely missed off, then it's, you know, a lot for the builder to take on within their budget if you've never specified it in the start. So I think, again, that early concept design phase is really critical to capture some of those previous lessons learned. You know, what are your fundamental risks that you need to manage with the building or with the fit out? So I think that's really critical too. But, you know, again, as you progress through, you will find things, and that's, I guess, that conversation that you have to have.
It's the to and fro with the client. You know, we can do this, and we know it's going to be more beneficial to you, but, you know, we're not willing to lose money of it. The client might not be willing to pay for it. So I suppose it does happen. Again, going back to the lessons learned thing, you know, if you could go to your capital works team and say, we have this issue on every project, please allow some money in the budget so that this doesn't happen, is sort of somewhere where the industry needs to go, because we just design new buildings and new buildings and new buildings, and they probably have inherently the same problems.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, actually, making sure the contingencies are there up front, because it happens in every project. You know, there's always seems to be some unforeseen circumstances. We did an 11-story building. We thought we'd thought of everything. We had cockatoos come and rip out the silicon out of the windowsills in the first week of handover. No one anticipated that.
I was going to say, no one's probably predicted that one, but I might get it added to the CIDD.
Yeah, they love certain types of silicon. They did a great job of it. They're just quite destructive little birds when they want to be. Thank you. Mark, there's a few questions in the chat you may want to look at as well, and I know someone else has got their hand up too.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Rita, you've got a question?
Yes, that's good. I just wanted to follow up in this conversation because, as you were saying, you got a very good process to get back to you guys after you finish your project. This is what we're finding that is wrong, etc. And you accumulate that knowledge. But my question is, and you mentioned that the industry needs to go that way. Are you aware that the industry is going that way? Because we keep building new buildings and we keep having the same problems all over again. So your company might be doing the right job, but I'm not sure other companies that are doing the right job. Just commenting if you have any comments about that.
I think, you know, it'd be the ideal world where everyone would start to look at that. But I think it really relies on clients who, like Curtin University, who have a number of assets, actually making that change. I suppose the builders can come along and implement it on each project that they work on, but they're not continually on the campus, or they're not continually working for that same client. So it really comes back down to the client and probably client-side project managers to bring those sort of things up with their clients and say, you know, this is what we implemented on the last job. I think we should do. We're just starting off concept. Let's get stuck into doing an O&M review and things that have gone wrong on campus and how we can avoid that in the future. But yeah, I suppose it's a vicious cycle, and it's just trying to change the way of thinking.
Some questions from the chat. So how did you engage with the safety team here at Curtin? So
I suppose there's sort of many different aspects of the Curtin safety team. There's the on the ground safety, there's the design safety side of things. But we hold regular, well, every Friday we hold site walks with Mark and Sonia from Curtin Safety. We invite obviously all the key players to safety and design reviews. Again, a lot of it feeds into sort of the client project management side, as they are the stakeholder managers. But yeah, it's just about those key players making sure that they're aware of how the building operates, how the building is going to be maintained. And I think the most effective way that I've found doing that is safety and design workshops and reviews, where you're really focusing on those key elements and not talking so much around, wholesale design type of things.
From my perspective, what I can say is that through the early sort of design piece, and certainly the safety and design workshop, we were very involved. And also as things progressed and there were really key structural pieces like the atrium cut out, like the stairs, we were quite involved in that process, and you talked to us about what your approach was going to be. Not necessarily that we were going to have an input, but from a collaboration perspective, which I found really, really great. And then obviously, our weekly site walks is a good opportunity to exchange information. So from that perspective, I feel like we're very involved with this, which is excellent.
And I think the site walks help because we can talk to you about the upcoming events that you may not otherwise hear of, and say, oh, okay, I'm curious about that one. Maybe let's set up a workshop or a meeting and we'll go through that in a bit more detail. So it just sort of that sort of 3-week look ahead to help you manage, I suppose, your stakeholders as well.
Indeed. And another question here about did you consider dust generation, asbestos containing materials and noise?
Yes, absolutely we did. So we did come across asbestos in the demolition work. So obviously before we even go near demolition or touching anything, we do a inspection and collect samples and do all the testing. And we have come across asbestos on the project. So then once we find that asbestos, we involve an expert on how we're going to manage that. And depending on the type of asbestos, friable and the like, it's how we will manage that. So in many cases, we've had a full encapsulated scaffold built around that demolition, and then the demolition is conducted within that encapsulation. Noise, obviously, big issue for us in the middle of a live campus. So we actually managed that early on in the project when we were doing all the noisy works by carrying out works starting at 4 a.m. And then we would have noise limits from 10 a.m. and then again at 2 p.m. as sort of, I suppose, the campus gets busier. So that was definitely a management plan that we implemented before we were even awarded the project. I suppose that's one of the reasons agreeing those sort of upfront commercial and contractual requirements with Curtin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a key part from our perspective, and understanding the methodology around the management of those noisy works. Also, very key in understanding about how you were going to manage what we knew to be, building containing asbestos and the various different challenges with that. What we didn't know was the extent, but we needed to know how you were going to manage it, because it has been pretty interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. How do you cope with the shared work environment? And I guess this is, coming back to that live campus piece. It is a big challenge for us.
Yeah, a huge challenge. And if you don't know Curtin University, the library is right in the middle of campus. So we're bringing semi-trailers in through students who are talking on their phones or texting and not looking up. So that was a huge management piece for us. I think, again, setting up the initial requirements with Curtin in the early days. So when we can bring trucks in and out, we have spotters at the back and front of every truck that comes into campus. Our noise management plan starting works at 4 a.m. to ensure that you know, we're not disturbing campus environment. So it's been a huge piece, but a very collaborative piece. And I think one of the biggest things, and I'm sure Mark would agree, the relationship that Lendlease and Curtin University have is a very open and collaborative environment. You know, we would any sort of issue or thought process that we have, we involve Curtin straight away, talk it through, and find the best solution for both parties.
Yeah, agreed. A couple of other things of that sort of comments really about the transfer of information between architects and builders. I know that we had an initial design before it was novated across to Lendlease. I mean, that's an interesting process in itself in terms of taking on what is essentially another person's design and then working that through. How does that go?
I suppose that is what I get paid to do. That is my role. And I think the design manager role has sort of come out of the D&C world that we now live in. And I think having an architectural background, basically I am the push and pull between the site team who are demanding and screaming at us for information and the architects who are trying to get that information out. So we novate the consultants across, so the architect stays on board with Lendlease the whole way through, and it's really my role to manage their design and their intent and the expectations of our delivery team. And I'm sure you all know that the delivery team who are on site shouting at subbies don't quite have the nature to deal with architects, and so my role really is to work out who's shouting the loudest, what they need, and how I can get that information to them. There is obviously, you know, you need to have key brief requirements and key design intent requirements set when the contractor takes over, so that design intent doesn't get lost through that construction process. Yeah. I think it's very easy for a contractor to come in and go, no, we're not doing it that way, we're going to do it this way, and it can completely destroy the design intent. And I think Lendlease, probably one of the reasons why I joined the Lendlease team was that they pride themselves on maintaining that design intent. And you know, the library's not finished yet, but I think you could see the School of Design and Built Environment that's recently been finished here looks exactly like it should in the renders. So, you know, that design intent has really stayed throughout. And it's about identifying, from a client perspective, identifying those key design items at the very beginning of the project, having a good architect that understands that there will be push and pull, and they have to have their key items that they're not going to budge on, and then the ones that they're willing to sort of negotiate on. And Wardle's specifically on that project did a very good job of, these are the ones you can't touch, and yep, we'll be respectful of that and understand that, and these are the ones that we can work on. And I think it's just about having that design relationship with your architect, which I think is probably where the design management role really feeds into that. It's not just a project manager or a construction manager talking to your architect. It's someone that actually understands the design intent and wants to fight for that.
Okay, I've probably got a couple more questions. So one, which is a bit spicy, has anything gone wrong on the project so far?
On the library project? I'm trying to think if anything, I mean, nothing's gone horribly wrong. I suppose the ACM fines have delayed things.
I think that's probably been the most significant thing that we've had on the project so far. And I think because it's such an old building, and when we've peeled back some of the layers, literally and figuratively, we've found other fun things underneath, which has really you know, increased the amount of time that we've needed to have for the project and changed the mode of delivery that we've had to do. So initially this building was going to be partially occupied whilst the construction and demolition was taking place. We've now needed to change that mode so that the library has now been fully decanted, meaning that all the people are now out of the library, no students, no staff, and transferred around the campus, which was initially outside of the risk appetite for the university. So some of these things have had impact from that operational standpoint, but other than that, no.
Yeah, and I think just day-to-day and very minor details that don't really even need clients' involvement around. As Mark said, you uncover something and it's not, you can't build it the way that it was designed. So you've got to get your architect out to site and detail something a bit different. So there's been plenty of that, just the nature of a redevelopment rather than a new greenfields.
Yeah, exactly. Another question about Curtin's design guidelines and how they have a role in informing, capturing and transferring learning to future projects. It's a great question. Yes, we do have design guidelines. One of the challenges I think that a lot of organisations have is maintaining the currency of those and updating those with lessons learned. And I'll be honest, we're early on in our sort of journey on that one. So I think, you know, as things progress, now we've got a good system for capturing lessons learned from our projects. Now the challenge is how do we feed that really well into our design guidelines, which are, as you can imagine, quite extensive. But we've got a couple more minutes, so go through these questions. It says, Mike, how much time do you contribute to, say, this project? Is it your full-time role? No, my full-time role takes on board the properties and facilities and development team more broadly, which is our maintenance team, but also our commercial team that does the leasing and the tenants. I probably spend around about a quarter of my time on projects. With the library, I think it ebbs and flows. I think you have a time where you need to contribute more time. And I think in that early design phase, that's like, if you're talking about bang for buck, that's the time to spend your money on, you know,
yeah,
really putting your time and effort into that, because that'll pay you dividends further down the track. And also, I think, you know, having a good relationship with the builder and building that, pun intended slightly, building that relationship with them is really fundamental to how can you be effective later on. I think if you're collaborative and you're open, you're looking to find an understanding and a common solution, I think that's going to be better and you will spend less time at the end.
I think, I mean, it's realising that both builder and client have a common goal, and is to complete the building successfully on time, on budget, and you know, working together is the best way to get there. And I think having that relationship where you can pick up the phone to each other and say, look, this isn't working for us, we need to find another way to do it, or vice versa, you know, is the best way to run projects. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen, and those relationships can get quite tense. But I think Lendlease and Curtin have managed to keep a very collaborative relationship. Yeah,
I agree. I've got probably one, maybe two more questions. So maybe the universities should share design guidelines with each other somehow. I think that's a pretty good idea. I might take that one on and see how we can do something like that as part of this special interest group. I think that's not a bad idea, because there's a commonality, I guess, across tertiary education campuses. I think there's always going to be some element of something specific to a particular university. So I think, you know, but having said that, you know, a sort of a guideline version that you can adopt and then maybe change up for yourselves is not a bad idea. I'll look into that one, Scott. Any more questions, as we're just about at the end now? Okay. Well, look, thank you very much. I think that's been really excellent, Abby. I think it's really given me a good idea about, you know, some of those processes, and I hope everyone else has got a fair bit out of it too. Fantastic. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Abby. See you later.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.